of activities on a various number of files. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Sandy, and good morning and good afternoon to our members across the country. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to cover a fair bit of ground as in the form of this update. And the intent here is just to give you a sense of, well, it's really to give you a sense of what we've been up to for the past 3 months, but it's a little more than that. It's going to be just me on the podium today. As Sandy said, I'm Martin Limas, and I'm the Vice President of Government Stakeholder Relations. Other participants who might usually join us today or join me on the podium today, the Christmas elves are busily working in the shop, so they're not going to join me today. I'm going to take this all by myself. There will be I'll be joined by Kyle Larkin, from our friends at Impact Public Affairs, at the end of the session to make a special announcement. So today we've spent some time in the past couple of sessions talking about. Hang on a second. Let me just see if I can control the screen here. Oops. Pardon me for a second. I'm having a challenge. Oops. Okay. There we go. I wanted to cover, to give you a sense of what we're going to cover today. So 4 things we'll be talking about. I'm going to remind you about our Climate Leadership Initiative. This is the PR exercise that we introduced this past summer and built up during the fall. But what I really want to focus on today is, now that we have the attention of government, what are HRAI's demands of government? Like, what is it that we're actually putting on the table? This is particularly for the federal government. Some aspects of what I'll be talking about today also pertain to provincial governments and some even to municipal governments. But this is mainly today going to be focused on what are we asking of the federal government to support us as climate leaders. And then to almost as if to illustrate the response of government, I want to talk a little bit about our pre-budget submission and the response in the form of the fall economic statement, just to give you a sense of how government is responding to our demands. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about an award that HRAI recently received. So let me take you back to something we talked about at our previous update webinar, and that is our climate leadership plan. You may recall that this is something we put out a statement. We announced it at the federal legislature at the press gallery. This is a picture of our chair at the time, Scott McDonald, delivering the news release at the National Press Gallery. It was well received. We sent a note to MPs from across the country. We took advertising in the Hill Times newspaper, which is widely distributed in Ottawa on Parliament Hill. And we created a bit of an impact, I'm going to say. We did get a fairly positive response from all those who you would expect, from the minister's office, from a lot of MPs, very supportive of what we're doing. And I'm going to say, for the most part, our membership has been very responsive in a very positive way to this initiative. In the fall, this is not in response to our submission, but it so happens that the Minister Wilkinson, Minister of Natural Resources Canada, released the Canada Green Buildings Strategy and started a consultation on a document that basically acknowledges we're far from where we need to be in terms of decarbonizing the building stock in Canada. The federal government has recognized that our industry and buildings in generally responsible for between 18 to 20% of emissions in the country, that the fix is available, and most of the solutions, or at least a big part of the solutions, are going to come from this industry. So this is a representation of the challenge that we have based on the age of the stock. And you know, if you look at this set of observations or messages that come in this in the green building strategy, you'll see probably the most pertinent statistic is the one that talks about the retrofit numbers. We're currently retrofitting buildings at a rate of 1%, and according to this green buildings report, if we keep at that pace, we will require 142 years to meet our targets, which are set for 2050. So we don't have 142 years, according to the Paris Climate Agreement, according to Canada's commitments. So the minister is saying we need to take that rate from 1% to closer to 3 to 5%. And that raises a lot of questions on what's possible, and puts much more of a spotlight on our industry in terms of what we can contribute to make this happen. So they're paying attention. And the question is, now that we have the government's attention, what is it that we want? And if I had to put it, I'm going to say we talk about a wide variety of issues, and we're engaged in various consultations. But if I had to summarize how, I guess it's a way to frame what it is that we want to put in front of the federal government. I'm calling it a 4-point plan. It's more than that. It's more complex, but as a way of simplifying it, as a framework for how to consider what we're asking of government. This is I think, a straightforward way for us to think about it. And it really is 4 sets of needs, four types of support that we need from the government to support electrification of heating across the country. 2 of them are on the demand side. If you remember your basic economics 101, we have the demand side of the economy and the supply side. 2 of the types of support we need are on the demand side. And one concerns market stimulus, which we're all familiar with. This is in the form of grants, loans, financing, tax credits, and the like. Something that's very of great interest to our industry. It tells us what types of products you're gonna bring into the market and sell and support or promote. The second form of demand side support that the federal government can do is in creating consumer awareness about technology options. So we are looking for support from the federal government at a high level to aid to create more informed decision making on the part of consumers and homeowners and building owners. So those are the 2 keys on the demand side. On the supply side, we're looking for 2 types of support. One that's a fairly new initiative. I'm just trying to this. Okay, thank you. One is a new initiative that we've just started. I'm going to talk about a little bit later. It's labeled ensuring. We're talking about it as ensuring supply, that's product supply, through supply chain management, including what the federal government sometimes calls onshoring, and that's bringing production from other parts of the world back into Canada to produce products specific to the Canadian market. So we're involved in some discussions around that. I'll come back to that in a bit. And finally, on the supply side is the ensuring a supply of workers through workforce development. And I don't think anyone on this call is going to disagree that it's by far the biggest challenge that the industry has. So that's one we've been talking with the federal government about for quite some time, starting to get some traction on that, which I'll be reporting on a little bit later. So let me start with market stimulus. Here are some elements of what we're working on in terms of market stimulus. One is our conversations with the folks at Greener Homes. That's a program that was designed very specifically for the residential market. That's in market now and doing a fair bit of business. And we've had a bunch of webinars, and I'm sure people on the call are paying attention to those, and you'll see that the numbers are building in support for that program. But from our industry's standpoint, it's not a perfect program, and we need to keep talking to NRCan about what I would say perfecting that program. So we have a small committee, I've mentioned it before, a small committee of industry volunteers who are now meeting fairly regularly with the program team at Greener Homes, suggesting new types of measures that might be included. And I'll say here, I'm not sure if Dick Foster's on the call, but Dick not long ago said, hey, what about zoning? So we're putting zoning on the table as a potential measure that might be included as a way of building energy efficiency and reducing carbon in homes. So the team at NRCan has been very open to the submissions we've made. Obviously the other perfecting elements of Greener Homes are around making sure that the product listings are correct. That's an ongoing challenge, something we're working on quite regularly. A lot of our manufacturers are very concerned about ensuring that their products are properly represented on the lists. And so that's a constant area of dialogue. The other area we're pushing on in relation to that program is to perhaps find a way to support directing homeowners' attention to properly qualified contractors. We all know in the industry that it's not just about the efficiency rating of the product or the carbon output of the product. It's also about doing a proper to code installation, and that requires properly qualified contractors. There's not very much of an element currently in the Greener Homes program to support competent qualified HVAC contractors. So that's something we're pressing on. Doing that right is very difficult. It's a big programming challenge for them, but that's something we're in active dialogue. So that's one area of market stimulus that we're working on. Another one, I'll be candid, this has not resulted in a lot of new, well, there's some new things that I'll mention, but we're also talking to NRCan and the government generally about other types of programs. If we're going to get to that 3 to 5% retrofit number, we're not going to do it relying only on greener homes, which to a large extent is focused on homeowners who are already to some extent committed to upgrading their home through deep energy retrofits. That's not the majority of where our industry is, where the largest volume of business happens. As most contractors know, it's mostly emergency replacements, different ranges of, maybe it's 70%, maybe 80%, obviously depends on the time of year. But right now, and coming into the winter season, it's very difficult for contractors to recommend the Greener Homes program when someone doesn't have heat. They're going to go with the most, and particularly if they haven't budgeted for equipment replacement. So we're arguing with NRCan for a program that would be aimed directly at emergency replacements to supplement Greener Homes, not replace it, but to supplement. And there's definitely interest in having that discussion. You will have all probably heard about the new incentive program that was introduced recently, targeted to oil heat and low and medium income families, mainly aimed at getting rid of oil in parts of Atlantic Canada. But that's an example of a targeted program. We're looking for a lot more of that type. And like I said, probably the most pressing one is looking at emergency replacements. We are hoping to see more program development in the commercial sector. Obviously, a big chunk of the industry is focused on retrofitting commercial buildings, and we believe there's a need for more supports in that area. You maybe have read, I'll talk a little bit more about this. It was mentioned in the budget, 2022 budget, and it's mentioned again in the fall economic statement, the 30% tax credit for businesses investing in clean tech. That clean tech definition has been broadened to include basically all types of heat pumps. So that's a good development, but I'm going to say we still haven't seen the fine details on that yet. So I'll be coming back to that in a minute. The second form of support on the demand side that I mentioned is in what we call market education or consumer education. And here, less has been done. When we sat down with Minister Wilkinson in September to talk about the green building strategy, the top level recommendation we made, basically he invited suggestions, and the top suggestion we made was to do a better job of promoting greener homes. Contractors can do a lot of work promoting the initiatives in greener homes, and they can get a lot of business out of it, but they are asking for supports at a high level from the government so that their customers are more educated about the options available. We really would like to see consumers asking about, asking contractors about their ability to deliver some of these low carbon technologies. So we need to get people past their fear or their misconceptions about heat pumps and other clean technologies, and that a lot of that can't come from the industry. It has to come from government, utilities, and other trusted advisors. So that's at a high level, not just promotion of greener homes, but as I said, promotion of all the technology options and benefits. Now, I will say here that we're not asking for government to do this on its own. And I just want to mention here an initiative that HRAI is exploring, and it looks like we're probably going to proceed with a relationship. So I guess the idea here is that some, if not a lot, of the promotion of the technologies of the sector should come from our own membership, from the industry itself, validated and supported by government. But we need to be talking about these technologies and selling them effectively. And part of the way we're looking to do this at a very high level is through partnerships with other organizations that have aligned interests. One of those that we've become aware of and that we've had fairly deep conversations with is an organization called the Building Electrification Alliance. They've given us an opportunity to help steer their organization. Who are the Building Electrification Alliance? They're a consortium of multitude of interested parties, including some utilities, finance companies, industry stakeholders, potentially government as well, consumer groups, with a common interest in educating, developing the market for electrification, to help move us, basically to say, like, take electrification as an important element of taking Canada towards a sustainable low carbon economy. We know it's not the only solution, but we're going to need a lot of work to make sure that electrification of buildings happens at the right pace and with the right kind of involvement of industry. So that's the vision, is to move Canada towards that low carbon economy, and the mission is to work as a cross-sectoral coalition to accelerate electrification of buildings in Canada, pretty simply put. So part of HRAI's interest and involvement in this is to allow us to do work that might not otherwise happen, strictly speaking, as an industry association. So a lot of it's about public outreach and education, some policy advocacy, working on collaboration, bringing different parties to the table, convening and facilitating dialogue among interested parties. There's the economic development aspect of this, which we know. It's also about promoting innovation and R&D and doing research and analysis. Possibly the biggest part of what the Building Electrification Alliance will deliver for our sector is that high-level public awareness and research and analysis. I mentioned some of the partners. I failed to mention academia are at the table in those discussions, as well as a small group of family foundations who want to support financially initiatives that align with their core values. So that's why HRAI is engaged with the Building Electrification Alliance. There's a lot more to be said about this. We'll probably have a separate webinar when the time comes. You should look for announcements potentially in January and beyond. So this will become a real thing in 2023. So other initiatives that we're exploring, again, some of you might have heard about this, but something we're now committed to doing as HRAI with some support from others, including the Ontario Geothermal Association, is we will be hosting a heat pump symposium on April 4th. In fact, we're looking to potentially do something of this sort in the off years when CMPX isn't happening. So in oddly numbered years like 2023, this may become a real thing. That's what we're calling it, the Heat Pump Symposium. And it's really all about talking about heat pumps of all types, ground source, air source, highlighting the technology and engaging the industry and other stakeholders in that conversation. So look for that. If you haven't already, marked it in your calendar for April 4th. It'll be a big event and you'll want to be there. We're doing what we're calling the Climate Roadshow. I think Lauren just told me, I think this is the title, HVACR Perspectives on Climate Change. And we're going to be doing one in February in the GTA and one in March in Vancouver in British Columbia, and possibly others in other parts of the country throughout the year. Again, taking that discussion similar to the one that we had at our annual meeting. If you were at our annual meeting, we had an industry panel, we had a government panel, and we had lots of very active and thoughtful conversation about the role of our sector in dealing with climate change. So we're going to take that on the road, calling it the Climate Roadshow. Look for that coming to your location soon. And we're just starting on programs focused on contractor education. HRAI has developed a program. We used Gord Cook. Some of you might be aware of that. And it's talking about how to sell heat pumps, how to lead with heat pumps as a contractor. We've had lots of support in that initiative from municipalities across the country, lots of interest, and actually even financial support for running some of those training sessions. So we're looking to do more of that in the year ahead. Now I want to switch over to the supply side of the equation. And the first topic here is really quite a new one, new to HRAI. And it's, the term that's been used is onshoring, probably not an appropriate term. I'll say why in a minute. But we've had lots of interest from the federal government, from Minister of Industry and Innovation, Philippe Francois Champagne. We've had some conversations with his office about their interest in bringing producers of clean tech technologies into Canada. You may have all seen some of the announcements that have been made over the past year about battery plants, about electric vehicle plants, other types of investment where they were actually putting in place factories in Canada that will provide those kinds of products. There's a strong interest from the federal government in doing more of this, and they haven't really spent a lot of time yet looking at heat pumps. So we're looking to engage in that. We've had interest from Ontario Minister of Industry, or I can't remember his exact title, Vic Fedeli, and had some meetings with his office with a similar interest in bringing manufacturing production into Ontario. And I'll add to that, when we were at the trade show last March at CMPX, we had interest from Minister of Energy Todd Smith, who did the ribbon cutting, and we had a couple of other MPPs walking the show floor with us, meeting some members, doing some meeting and greeting, and I think we did 3 or 4 of these. All of them asked the same question after the fact: what would it take to bring some of these manufacturers into Canada? And they were interested in bringing them into Ontario. But it just tells us there's a strong appetite on the government side for doing some of this. So, and Vancouver Economic Commission actually funded a study exploring what conditions might be needed to bring manufacturers into British Columbia. That report has just been released. I'm going through it now. I was one of the advisors on that. And I'm going to say, when HRAI was first invited to be part of that, we were very skeptical about whether or not any manufacturer would consider setting up in Canada, let alone in the lower mainland of British Columbia, considering the size of the market. But there have been a whole lot of things that have changed since that first conversation more than two and a half years ago. What we've learned more recently is that there's a lot of interest from HRAI manufacturer members. When we ran this up the flagpole with the manufacturer's board of directors, there was a great deal of interest, and we've actually created a bit of a task team to explore some options. We suspect that part of this pivot is due to the supply chain disruptions that were caused by COVID over the last couple of years. The war in Europe that's creating some uncertainty about supply and other factors. It's really important to get product to markets on time and as expected. So there is an interest across globally among manufacturers to placing production facilities in markets where they sell their products. There's also an obvious sense of opportunity in the Canadian marketplace because of government directions that have been taken, that this is a growing market for heat pumps and other clean technologies. So our manufacturers are starting to pay attention. We announced this committee that was formed a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to say I've had 4 or 5 inquiries from manufacturers since then about how they can become more involved in that initiative. So that tells us we're on the right track. HRAI has not made any firm commitments to the how and what HRAI's role should be in that. That's the job of this task team. They're looking at the options, and we'll make some recommendations to the manufacturer's board of directors early in the new year. The last form of support that we're looking for from government on the supply side as well is, as I noted earlier, probably the biggest one, because the lack of qualified, competent workers in our industry is still the biggest impediment to moving down this pathway. And I don't need to tell anyone on this call, I'm just going to remind you that it really is two parallel challenges. The first one being the aging workforce and insufficient apprenticeship intakes. This is true across the country. We're just not seeing that growth to replace the aging workforce, the retirements in the industry. This has all been documented by Build Force Canada and others. We know it's a growing problem that has to be addressed in its own right. And there's all kinds of solutions to that we need to get working on. But in addition to that, we have this challenge where we do have lots of skilled people in the industry, but they don't all have the right skills if we're going to be going to low carbon technology. So in addition to the supply issue, there's a need for reskilling and training really across the country. And that's some of the work we're doing. You will have heard about the proposals that we placed with Employment Social Development Canada. We have a very large workforce development project investment that we're looking for support on, which we still have not heard about. We're hoping to get some of that support also from NRCan. But at the same time, HRAI will probably be pursuing some of these types of projects on its own rather than simply relying on government. So there's going to be a lot of work in this area, I'd suggest, over the next couple of years. And the message we keep sharing with government is that this industry is quite resilient and it is adaptable. It's adapted to change before, but it will not and cannot adapt at the rate of change that the government is expecting. I mentioned that 3 to 5% retrofit rate. The industry cannot manage that today. We don't have enough people to do that work, let alone having the right people with the right skills to work with the technologies in question. So that's the workforce development side. I have to do a bit of a time check here. Let me just.
Martin, I'm just going to bring your attention to a question in the Q&A, which is in regards to the DOE Appendix M1 and the impact on the greener homes rebate. Do you have any updates on that file?
I have the answer will come in the form of a avoidance. I will refer the attendee to 2 webinars that we hosted in the last couple of weeks that actually NRCan ran answering those specific questions. So they talked about how the change related to Amendment 17 will affect the Greener Homes program. If you were not able to participate in that session, we've been told by NRCan, and we're still waiting to see a copy of it. Maybe some who were there received a copy directly, but I've not yet seen a copy of that slide deck. So if we can find out who was asking the question, we'll be sure to share that slide deck when it comes into our possession. Okay, and I wouldn't want to misstate what the answers from NRCan were on those questions, but they recognized the need for answers on that and did that in the form of a webinar. Okay. All right, so coming back to the point about workforce, I don't want to talk too much about the specific workforce projects that we're working on. That would take there's a whole, in fact, we've done a session on that in the past. We probably should do one again in the near future to talk about the actual work that we're doing or starting to do in workforce development. We don't have time to go into those details today. But I will say that when we talk with government, we always emphasize this is both at the provincial and federal level. As people know, trades training is really managed at the provincial level. So it's where we have to really push hard on this. We need more tradespeople. We need people with the right skills. So we have to work with Skilled Trades Ontario, with the ITA in British Columbia, with the apprenticeship agencies across the country. And that's a really active file in almost every province for us. So what we need from the government isn't, as I said earlier, the industry will adapt if there's work to be done. If we need, we need to turn our attention to new kinds of technologies, the industry will adapt, but it can't adapt at the pace that the government is requiring. So our proposals to government are really all about accelerating the process of training, reskilling. That's where we need support. We're going to need training subsidies. We're going to need support to stand up the kind of training that the industry needs. We need to explore a whole lot of different mechanisms to make sure that we have the skilled workforce tomorrow as soon as possible. So I'll leave that one there. That's my run through of the 4 forms of support that the industry needs. That's the way we framed it. Lots of conversations going on under all four of those pillars, but that's if you want to think about how we're tackling this, that's the way we're framing the discussion. Now, for those supports to work, two other comments to make is it's never appropriate to work on just one element. In fact, part of our discussions with NRCan on greener homes and other forms of support is, it's one thing to stimulate the marketplace, but if the industry is not there, doesn't have the products in the timeframes that are needed, or doesn't have the workers to install or service the equipment, we're creating a gap, and that's going to result in inflation. It's going to result in unhappy customers. It's going to result in industry frustration. So all of these elements require investment and attention and coordination to move the market forward together. And so timing is really critical on this. So we want to have that discussion about bringing manufacturing into the country. And by the way, I should just add one thing about the manufacturing thing. I meant to say it earlier and I forgot. One of the things that our little task team concluded very quickly is we probably shouldn't use the term onshoring, because it implies that there isn't any production in Canada, and the only thing we should be focused on is bringing production into Canada. We want to frame that conversation as securing supply of the needed products, which includes supporting existing manufacturers in our membership who do produce currently in Canada. So it's not really about just bringing others into Canada, it's about finding ways to ensure the right products are being produced to satisfy market demand in Canada. I just wanted to clarify that in case anyone got the wrong impression. That's a conclusion that our little task team came to fairly quickly. The second key point in all of this as part of our discussion is that we have to work with governments and allied stakeholders to move this forward together. This is not something that HRAI or our members can do on our own. We're going to need a lot of support from other stakeholders. So again, it suggests that the timeliness of the building electrification lines couldn't be more fortuitous. It's a really good time for us to be engaging with the other people that they'll be bringing to the table, both the intelligence, the resources, and financial as well, that those groups can bring will be very helpful to our cause. So that's to answer the question, what are we asking of government? I want to turn now to the recently announced federal fall economic statement issued by Minister Chrystia Freeland. And I'm not going to go through all of this in detail. There was some reports in our newsletter. You can go and look there. There was a summary of the key investments that were made, but I'm just going to touch on some of them because they do suggest that the government is listening to some of what we're telling them. And to be clear, it's not just HRAI. We're not the only ones talking about a workforce development need or support for clean technologies. There's others who are saying this too, but these are many of them direct responses to some of our inputs. The first is an investment tax credit for clean technologies. The 30% tax credit I mentioned earlier, that will be made available now to all clean technologies, including heat pumps. They explicitly included heat pumps in that. That was part of the underlined change that they've made. Now the government is investing in a program called the Sustainable Jobs Training Center. And I'll just quote from the report. This center will bring together workers, unions, employers, and training institutions across the country to examine the skills of the labor force today, forecast future skills requirements, and develop curriculum, micro-credentials, and on-site learning to help 15,000 workers upgrade or gain new skills for jobs in a low-carbon economy. That almost sounds like a request that we would have made in those words. So that's a direct response to some of what we're asking for. And I can add to this, just last week, HRAI was approached by Build Force Canada, which is an organization funded in part by the government to document labor shortages, to talk about where the needs exist in the country. They do reports on an annual basis, labor market analyses, and they want to work with HRAI to do an investigation or a research report on what are the specific training needs and skills development needs in our sector, in the HVACR sector, both commercial and residential, to help meet our climate change targets. What are the numbers we need? Like, how many people is this industry going to require to meet the 2030 targets, to meet the 2050 targets? We've been talking about this, but we've never really put hard numbers to it, and Build Force Canada wants to do that. So when they approached us, the phone call I had last week, part of the comment was they are being asked by the federal government to do this. So this tells us again that the federal government is starting to pay attention to this. Maybe it's a bit belatedly, but it's still a good sign that we're on the right path. There's other forms of support, such as the Sustainable Jobs Stream under the Union Training and Innovation Program. This new organization called the Sustainable Jobs Secretariat. You can read all about these in the reports that we've shared. They have started to pay attention to what a lot of trade-based organizations like HRAI are saying about immigration being a key to unlocking a supply of skilled personnel. We've been saying, and groups like the National Trade Contractors Coalition and the Canadian Construction Association, a variety of other trades-based groups are saying we need to bring more skilled labor through immigration. The budget, or rather the fall economic statement, talks explicitly about beefing up the numbers and explicitly focusing on skilled trades as with a targeted number in those immigration levels. So for us, that means we need to be at the table to make sure that HVACR is considered among the different sets of trades that this industry, that the Canadian economy will need. And the Build Force report probably will be very helpful to quantify what types of, what kinds of people we need and in what numbers. There's a variety of supports for youth employment, $300 million over 2 years, starting next year through the Youth Employment Skills Strategy Program. And a lot of commentary on investing in advancing Canada's manufacturing competitiveness, including some supports for what I was talking about before, bringing companies or supporting companies rather that are producing clean technologies for the Canadian economy financially, and creating advantages for them. So that's all speaking to some of the very things I was mentioning in the past half an hour. And if we want to get a sense of what these numbers look like, sorry. This is extracted from the fall economic statement. So you can see the dollars we're talking about are quite substantial. Investing in skills, we're talking about $310 million over the next 5 years. The investment tax credit, the 30% tax credit, is a $6.6 billion spend on the part of the government. This focus on immigration levels, that plan is it's starting this year at $50 million, but over 5 years, it's an investment of $1.6 billion. So what better way to illustrate the government's commitment than to talk about the dollars that they're looking to invest in these initiatives. Now, one thing I have to add as a bit of caution on this is that's all numbers coming out of the fall economic statement. We should be cautious because some of this we've heard before. So as recently as the budget, which is in the spring, we heard some of these things. Now, some of these things have happened, right? The third point on this screen, you'll see the $458 million that was announced as an addition to the Greener Homes program, and everyone applauded that as of the time that we announced this. I'm just pulled this slide from a previous update, and where we were kind of applauding some of the initiatives at that time. Some of these things the government has already talked about. So what we're hearing in the fall economic statement is they're just underlining or recommitting, but in some cases we haven't seen an expenditure as yet. So I just want to remind the audience here, like they talked about this investment tax credit, for example. They've been talking about it actually for the better part of a year. We're still waiting to see the really specific measures that will be attached to that. So all of that information, when it's made available, we'll share with members. But I just wanted to say that we've kind of heard some of these things before, and so we can't get too excited about some of what's being announced this past month without being be a little bit skeptical. This means the government relations team will continue to be busy to ask for the details related to some of these measures. And I should I'm gonna leave it at that now in the interest of time. As I mentioned before, there's lots more to talk about. We'll be doing some additional focused webinars. I was hoping that at today's session, we'd be able to share with our members the details of Amendment 17, that it would have passed second reading, a publication in the Gazette 2 federally. We are not at that stage yet. So those manufacturers on the call who are wondering where we're at, we have not yet had that announcement made. So the minute we hear, we will be sharing that information, and we'll probably do a webinar with Stephen Chartrand, who's our lead on that file, to share the details with members. Now, I'm not sure if Kyle's, can I just ask if Kyle Larkin is on the call as yet?
Yeah, hi Martin.
I can hardly hear you there, Kyle. Are you there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Can I just invite you to the stage now, and you can talk a little bit about the CSAE Award of Merit that HRAI received recently.
Absolutely, happy to, Martin. For those of you who don't know, my name is Kyle Larkin. I'm the Vice President here at Impact Public Affairs. I've had the honor of working with HRAI for the past 5-6 years, and with Martin, Sandy, and the rest of the team there. And really proud to speak on this. CSAE stands for the Canadian Society of Association Executives. For those of you who don't know what that is, you probably don't. They're pretty much the association for associations. There's literally an association for everything in Canada. So you got to bet there's an association for associations. They represent, associations like HRAI, like the Construction Association, like CIPH, all of them that you may be familiar in this space. And each year they have an awards program to give to associations that have really honorable campaigns that advance either in industry practices or association practices. So HRAI was really proud this year to receive the Award of Merit from CSAE. It was for the campaign. The official name of it was Advancing Government Climate Change Objectives through HVACR Innovation and Leadership. But to give you a little breakdown on the campaign that HRAI ran, obviously it was all around climate change. As you folks know, at the federal level, there's a big focus on climate change and climate adaptation. And our goal really was to get HRAI at the forefront of that conversation, as the solutions that you folks manufacture, sell, and install really will help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across Canada. So it really started with a lot of the work HRAI did prior to the Greener Homes initiative that was launched. A lot of government relations was done, a lot of engagement with government to bring that program to fruition. I would say that HRAI has lobbied for years for a program that would support homeowners with the cost of upgrading their equipment with more energy efficient equipment, which at the end of the day, will help lower greenhouse gas emissions from Canada's built environment. So we had Greener Homes come in. Obviously it wasn't the perfect program. There are still some challenges with the program that we're working on, but it was a start to a conversation. And HRAI has been working very closely with the government to get that program closer to perfect than it was first launched. But really, the coming out of that program, there was a realization that HRAI needed to be stronger on the climate change front, and really needed to put together a statement that said that the HVACR industry was there to help and was there to combat climate change alongside the government, the federal government and provincial government. So HRAI worked to put together a climate action statement, which was launched in June of this year. And throughout the summer and into the fall, it was promoted to the public, promoted to elected officials, government officials, and finally it capped off with a reception here on Parliament Hill with over 200 attendees. And really the statement, as I said, was really talking about how HVACR solutions can help the government reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and help the government reach its climate change objectives that it set itself for 2030 and going into 2050. So for all that work, CSAE recognized HRAI in October for this great campaign. As you can see in the image, Martin was there to accept the award in his finest suit. And I would just say that, you know, from Impact and from my team here, I think we're really proud to have helped HRAI receive this award, and I think it's very much well deserved for all the work that the association has put into this important campaign.
Thank you, Kyle. It was an honor to receive the award, and it was nice to see that you know, a very focused kind of campaign of that type is recognized as being effective. I mentioned earlier in the session, the most important form of effectiveness, it's not about getting an award, but it's about getting the attention of government. And hopefully participants in this webinar will now realize that we seem to have gotten the attention of government. So the most important metric in a program like that is, did it work? Did we get the attention we were looking for? And the answer is yes, we have. So thank you for weighing in there, Kyle. Really very much appreciated, and thank you for all the work that you do and Impact Public Affairs does on behalf of HRAI and its members. So the last thing I want to, well, maybe have a little bit of time for questions. I think we do, but I just wanted to mention some events that are coming up, just to those who maybe have your calendars out, you can actually mark some of these in. So we know that electrification isn't necessarily the only path to decarbonization. So we have an emerging trends committee that's been meeting, that's been looking at different things happening. They spent a lot of time talking about electrification as a path to decarbonization in buildings, but now they're focused on hydrogen as an alternative fuel. And towards that, we're hosting a webinar next week, next Tuesday, I think it is. That's next December 13th, on the state of hydrogen as an alternative fuel, specifically for heating homes and buildings. So if you have an interest in that sector, in that technology, I would urge you to tune in. We'll have people, different experts on that subject matter participating, including someone from the Hydrogen Heating Network, someone from Bosch, I believe, and someone from NRCan, talking about the federal government's hydrogen strategy. I mentioned earlier Amendment 17 coming into force. A lot of questions we're getting these days, like, is it real yet? Do we know what the rules are? I will just say, we think we know what the rules are under Amendment 17. We know what the government has said they would be and what our submissions were, but they're not permitted to tell us whether any of what we recommended is reflected in the final version of Amendment 17. All we know is they have to pass it sometime before Christmas. So, well, I think they have to. It has to come into effect January 2023. So presumably it has to be passed before the end of this month. And we will share immediately when we hear word from NRCan about the about it coming into force. But the details are still to come. So stay tuned for that. I will share with you that there is an NRCan announcement regarding the Greener Homes program coming in January for those of our members in Ontario. Some of you will have already heard. They told me we can share this because they did a quiet news release on this already a week and a half ago. And it's a partnership that NRCan is entering into with Enbridge in Ontario to manage the Greener Homes program in Ontario. Very much like the partnerships that they've done in other provinces, such as Nova Scotia with Efficiency One there, and some others in Lincoln, Quebec, and so on. They've done some of these provincial partnerships. In Ontario, the new delivery model going forward will be a partnership with Enbridge. So I'm sure you'll want to hear more about that. There will be a news conference in January. HRAI has been invited to host that news conference. We're working on dates and details at the moment. I mentioned the climate road shows and the dates I provided earlier. I'll remind you, in the GTA, the date is February 21st, and in Vancouver or British Columbia, it's March 7th. The Heat Pump Symposium, April 4th, that's going to be a big event. Everyone will want to be there. It's going to be the do not miss event of the year, I believe. The Building Electrification Alliance, I touched on several times. Stay tuned for that. There will likely be big announcements in January, and at the very least, some focus on their role at the Heat Pump Symposium in April. And now just the very last thing I'll mention is the next government relations update in roughly 3 months' time. what we're hoping to do for that session, and I'm going to invite you to put your thoughts forward, is we want to, rather than doing a one-way presentation, we want to answer questions that you might have. So if you have questions about any of the government relations work that HRAI is doing on your behalf, we invite you to submit those questions, and we will be taking, whatever we think we can handle in the time allowed, 5, maybe 10 questions. Some might have simple answers, some might require some discussion. But we're going to invite members to pose questions as difficult as you might want, and we'll try to answer from a government relations standpoint, either what we're doing, what we're thinking about doing, or whether we need to maybe pivot in some fashion, or maybe introduce something new. And it's also a possibility that you could introduce new ideas for us to consider.
So Martin, there's a question in the chat from David Berg. On the topic of perfecting greener homes as an energy advisor, I encounter several clients who would be interested in adding a heat pump, but have relatively new propane furnace. Well, this is a really long.
No, I see the question.
Yeah,
I understand it.
okay.
Look, that is definitely a focus of our working group, is to consider those types of hybrid arrangements where they don't, we need to tweak the rules around that, because as I'm sure David is suggesting, and lots of our members have said outright, we're missing a lot of opportunities by not allowing heat pump additions to existing systems that maybe aren't specified to work together. It's a missed opportunity. We can reduce carbon emissions from a home with a relatively simple fix that shouldn't require the whole retrofit or the whole matching process. So that's something we're working on. In fact, with this small task team, when we went forward and met with the folks at Greener Homes, it's probably the first recommendation they made. There were some even simpler recommendations, like we should be including water-to-water ground source heat pumps, which are now, for mysterious reasons, excluded from the program. They're not mysterious. We actually know the reason, but there's no real technical reason that they should be excluded. So there's simple suggestions we've made. I mentioned earlier, we're talking a little bit about zoning as well, and some other new measures, but this is one that's kind of a top priority for us, David, so stay tuned on that. I think there was another question. I'm going to go back. You saw it earlier about.
There was one about the Greener Homes grant. When do we expect the changes to be implemented?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and all I can say is the wheels at NRCan turn very slowly. So just to manage expectations, you know, they've slowly committed to doing more frequent product listing updates. They've committed, you know, originally they told us once a year, then it was every 6 months. I think it's quarterly now. So they're at least committing to improving some of those key elements, like putting the right information out to the market. In terms of some of these new measures, the idea of pre-qualifying contractors in some fashion, NRCan has been a little bit hesitant to support a fully fledged program of looking at contractor credentials in advance, but they are talking about a badging system, which I think will be introduced in 2023, where contractors will be identified, and that will require some commitment that they make to be ethical and to adhere to certain standards or whatever, and they'll be allowed to use a badge of some sort. So there's some things that they're looking to introduce. As far as the changes in measures, that's probably the most difficult one to get done. They need to see all the technical criteria, what the savings are, what the carbon reductions are. So every time we bring an idea forward, it has to go through their analysis. So that's a long-winded way of saying, can't promise you that any of this is going to happen immediately. But bear in mind, this is what NRCan tells us all the time. This is meant to be a 7-year program. So they're hoping to make incremental improvements kind of every 6 months along the way. And I think our discussions would suggest that they're now starting, they feel like they're in a position where they can actually start implementing changes, that they're, you know, all the cylinders are firing at the same time now, at least. So, so stay tuned. Do we have more questions, Loretta?
Yeah, we do. There was a couple of other issues that David wanted to bring to the attention. A need for air-to-water air source heat pumps to be added to the product list, and shortage of licensed AC techs in some areas due to lack of opportunity to apprentice.
Yeah, the first one I can address, that's a subject of the same task team I mentioned, has got that item on the list of new measures they'd like to recommend. And NRCan has said, yes, they'll look at that. They want to see an appropriate test standard. There is one in Europe. So there's some discussion around that. We're bringing some of the right experts to the table. In fact, I think that we're striking a subcommittee to look at that. So maybe, David, if there's some expertise that you have, you might want to share that with us in terms of appropriate standards and all the rest. That is an active discussion. And on the other one, the shortage of licensed techs, that's a bigger challenge. It's one that we have to address at the provincial level. No question, because that's where trades are managed. And that is a discussion we are having with Skilled Trades Ontario. We're having it with the new agency in British Columbia. So we understanding that's a need. I'm going to say air conditioning techs, one of the things we have, even the existing certification in Ontario, this has been brought to our attention by a number of contractors. If they have what we call in Ontario the 313D license, it doesn't mean that they've necessarily worked on heat pumps. If they've only worked in a company where they're installing air conditioning systems, they may not have, even though it's within scope for their trade, they may not have the experience. So there may be a need for upgrading, for some skills, from not retraining, but some additional skills development, let's just say. And that's something we're working on. We're trying to identify exactly what those training needs are and find ways to fill them. I see Grant has a question, which we've heard quite a lot. Will these initiatives survive a government change? And that's not a question we can answer. The current government tells us that they're trying to build in resiliency to these measures, meaning to the programs, such that a change in government won't be able simply to just with the stroke of a pen eliminate programs like greener homes. What kind of protections they can actually provide is anyone's guess. That they're really legal matters. So, you know, if I would say just at a high level, this is just an opinion. If a government were to suggest making a change, they would want to be sure that they were on the right side of the Canadian public, of the voters. And whereas it might have been true some years ago that most Canadians don't particularly care about these issues, I think all the survey evidence we've seen in recent years suggests that Canadians are rapidly becoming more and more concerned about climate change and about seeing appropriate measures in place. So not really a great answer for you, Grant, but I think that's all we can do is we can keep making sure that governments see that this industry has solutions and that we can deliver them, but we need the support, as I said earlier. You know, and if there's a change in government, it just means HRAI and our GR team will have to pivot and either talk about other issues or re-emphasize why these issues are particularly important. Did I miss any questions, Loretta?
Yeah, I don't think there's any more questions.
Okay.
Want to do a bit of a wrap up?
That's it. I'm going to say, like, stay tuned. We'll there's all these other events coming up. As I said earlier, please mark them in your calendar if you haven't already. Look for the notices that will come from HRAI. Pay attention to the newsletter that's coming every Thursday for more information. And thank you all for attending today, and the best of the season from HRAI and to all of our members. Thanks for coming.